Greetings. I'm Emory Edwards, and I'm the Outreach Director here at EdChoice. EdChoice is a national nonpartisan organization committed to ensuring every family has the freedom to attend whatever educational option that works best for them. We are intellectually honest, trusted experts, forward thinkers, and most importantly, believers in parents. We strive in our work to educate, train, and engage parents and the public and policymakers on the benefits of education opportunity so that all families have the access to build successful lives and collectively a stronger society. We hope that you will join us in this conversation around educational options for all families to ensure that parents have access to whatever option works best for their children. You can find out more information about EdChoice and our work by visiting our website, www.edchoice.org. Greetings. I'm Emory Edwards, and I'm the Outreach Director here at EdChoice. EdChoice is a national, nonpartisan organization committed to ensuring every family has the freedom to attend whatever educational option works best for them. We're excited to be a NBCSL Corporate Roundtable member and the sponsor of this upcoming workshop entitled Policy Talk. How can we design education policies to support the desires of all Black and Brown families? The COVID-19 pandemic has shined a bright light on the inequities in our current education system. When schools initially shifted to remote learning environments, families were forced to adapt and find resources to ensure their students continued receiving a quality education. Some parents chose to stick it out with their remote options offered by their traditional districts. Others sought other schooling options such as online virtual schools, homeschooling, and learning pods or microschools. As COVID 19 continues to spike across the country, parents are increasingly more concerned about how they can ensure their children receive a quality education. Our panelists in this workshop will explore how we can change and adapt educational policies to ensure that the needs and desires of Black and Brown families are being met as we move into 2021.
Well, hello, esteemed audience. I'm Chris Stewart. I'm the host. I'm moderating this particular panel on a very important topic that we have today. How can we design education policies that support the desires of all Black and Brown families? It's a critical time to have this conversation. As everyone knows, we are in a very troubling time. We are in the middle of a national and global pandemic, really, that has upset the balance of households across this country and across the world. We do know that anytime America gets a cold, as we have heard oftentimes before, Black America gets the flu. And that means that Black families right now are struggling more than ever. And specifically when it comes to getting our kids an education and making sure that they have all the opportunities possible to learn, make sure that they are supported and they have the resources. And right now we have entire school districts that have not kept track of where our students are. We have students that are falling behind and we don't have exact numbers. We have a loss of data to know exactly how our students are doing. And this is not good for our future. This means that 2022 and 2023, we could be facing a really, really desperate situation for Black children in the United States. 8 million Black children who are in public education, in public schools. We don't know how to best support them and help them, and to help our leaders do our best for them. So today's discussion, we have an esteemed panel that can help us. And I will go around and let the brothers introduce themselves, tell them what your relationship to this question is around how do we design education policies for our kids, for Black families right now. And I'd like to start with you, Sekou, just a quick introduction and how you are related to the question.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Chris. Looking forward to the conversation today. My name is Sekou Biddle. I'm the Vice President for Advocacy and Programs at UNCF, United Negro College Fund. You know, I come to UNCF for after a career as a classroom teacher in public schools in DC, Atlanta, and New York City. You know, sort of professionally, my background has been in public education, which obviously I think is hugely transformative and important in all communities, but in particular, a important lever for Black and Brown communities. And then, you know, on a personal level, a parent of two young men. I have one in college right now and one in high school. And I think, more importantly, connected to today's conversation and toward this conference, I formerly served on the Board of Education here in DC, where I live and work, and also served on the DC City Council. So important policy levers we pull. I mean, obviously we've got a unique crisis that we're involved in, but looking forward to today's conversation. Hopefully we can provide some perspective and ideas that might help the participants of the conference.
Thank you. And Perry, can you introduce yourself and your connection to the question?
Yes, my name is Perry Daniel. I work with the company K-12 Incorporated, also a CEO Action for Racial Equity Fellow, which I just started October 1, which is focused on improving the lives of Black people in the areas of education, economic empowerment, healthcare, and public safety. But I am also a former educator, former teacher, school administrator, served in those capacities in both traditional public schools, charter schools, as well as virtual schools. So with what we have going on here in our country, I think it's important that we look at it from the standpoint of how do we prepare our educators to deal with this so that they can best support our students and families. So that's one way I look at it. But I too, personally, in the spring, I was hit with it. My kids came home. At the time, I had 3 that were in school. Currently, one is on it as a freshman in college. I have 2 that are still in school that are presently they're going back. They're in the building right now. So I don't know how long that will last. So the work that we're doing here is going to impact me, impact them personally. And I think it's important that we look at it from the standpoint of how do we not only support our families through the policies that are being put in place, but how do we support the millions of teachers that are serving these, our students? So, and I also serve as a member of the Corporate Roundtable for National Black Caucus of State Legislators.
You're doing a lot, Perry. You're doing a lot, brother. Curtis Valentine, jump in, man.
Hello, brothers. Curtis Valentine. I serve as the Deputy Director for the Reinventing America Schools Project with the Progressive Policy Institute, which is a national campaign to really highlight the impact and the benefits of having school systems that have schools that promote schools that have a higher level of autonomy, but that autonomy comes with a level of accountability, but also giving those parents in that system the same level of choice that all parents have, regardless of race or income. I also currently serve on the Board of Education in Prince George's County, Maryland. I've been on the board for 7 years, an at-large member. My school system is the 17th largest system in America. I am the only member of the school board who's actually taught in Prince George's County Public Schools, one of a few members who has children in the system, and the only member who has a spouse who's a principal. And so I am a policy maker. I am and a consumer of the product in which I produce directly. And so I say dinner time at the Valentine's is policymaker, practitioner, and consumer. And I have the entire life cycle right there. I also co-founded a campaign called Real Men Teach to increase the number of male educators of color in front of our students, to really recruit and retain, particularly Black men in education, because the impact is clear. Glad to be here with you all.
So it's good that everyone here has leadership experience, because I think that's where we should probably start. If you are a leader right now and your concern is making sure that Black families and Black students continue making progress, you're going to have before you a lot of things that deal with broadband access. We don't have enough of it. Family economic security, we don't have enough of it. The yo-yo effect between schools opening and closing in some places. This week you're in person, next week you may not be in person. As leaders, where would you start? If you're talking specifically the Black leaders right now, where do you start to make sure that we fortify kids and families?
I'll start. I mean, I think the term over-communication is a term that we should use. We all know that in school systems, there are a cohort of parents who are engaged, who have the ear of system leaders, school leaders, and in many ways shape the policies at the school and system level just by their advocacy, by their engagement, and their way they communicate back and forth, and the consequences they put in place for policymakers and practitioners who don't do what they think they should do. We also know there is probably a larger constituency of parents whose voices are unheard, and so right now it's listening. There's a lot that the data is just not going to show you, and there are clear policies that I think can be introduced once the level of communication with parents who were traditionally not heard, being heard by those at the school and system level. I think the first communication at the teacher to student level, teacher to parent level, and obviously that progresses through the school system with the principal and the school board members, and then the superintendent. And so right now it's trying to find out where we are. I think in many ways we're all kind of in the dark with the flashlight trying to describe the elephant, but we're all kind of describing it differently just by our own perspective and our own sort of biases when it comes to this. My fellow panelists all mentioned that we're all fathers and we're all parents. It's a very, you have a very different perspective as a policymaker when you are a parent. It's clear. And there are things that we all know that we read on our day jobs, and when we turn off our computers, we sit down at night at the tables and just realize, there is something missing from what I was just reading to what's happening right now in real life at this dinner table. And that extrapolated across 15,000 different school districts, and within different school districts, different types of schools, whether it's innovation, whether it's charter, whether it's traditional public, whether it's a magnet, all those things vary. So being a listener, but not just sort of listening for the sake of doing it. And we know some policymakers do that just for show. It's really being responsive to the parents and students who are going through something unthinkable and historic. And so right now, I think it's important that we listen. I will just say one thing you mentioned earlier about America catching a cold, Black people catching the flu. I'd amend that. I think right now we have walking pneumonia. The idea of walking pneumonia is you are functional. You can move around with walking pneumonia, but if not caught earlier, it is fatal. And so you think about the dreams of those students whose lives are going to be permanently impacted by this. It is a death sentence to their dreams, a death sentence to their aspirations. And so we have to diagnose this walking pneumonia and really address it as soon as possible.
Now, something I heard in there that I heard you say was about data and just about making sure that we're getting clear information and then over communicating. As a father myself, I don't feel like anyone in my state is doing a very good job of over communicating, as you say, with us and keeping us informed of what the actual data is. I found out this morning my local area is on the New York Times list of one of the worst hit places in the country, and we're in some little rural podunk of Minnesota. You would never expect we would make news. No one locally has communicated that to us. Our school district hasn't communicated that. Our state leaders haven't communicated that to us at all. So data to me is important and key. Sekou, do you think that that our legislators and our folks at higher levels are actually getting good data and good information to even communicate to the people?
Yeah, Chris, I think that's a great question. I think, the answer is kind of, but I think what Curtis led with is actually the more important thing, because you opened up this round of questions around leadership, and I think the essence of leadership has to be that whatever you know or you don't know, like to Curtis's point about over communication, you got to communicate that to people. And even if you're communicating to people we don't know, but you're telling them every single time you talk to them, which is frequently, here's what we know and here's what we don't know, even if the don't know is much more than the do know, at least you're creating the opportunity to create and develop trust where people understand, okay, it's not that they're holding things back from us, it's that they don't know. And I think part of the challenge throughout this pandemic has been a lot of we don't know. And I think, on the one hand, we know more now about the nature of the disease than we did in the spring. And so that should better equip us for moving forward. But I think what we're seeing now is a legacy of a lack of communication with people about what we know and what we don't know and what we understand, that's leading to this sense that, like, you know, there's no objective truth about it. Like, your opinion, my opinion, they're all the same. And they're just simply not. My wife's a pediatrician and an expert in public health. And, you know, like, we're having a lot of conversations about what the state of the pandemic. And it's clear to me, like, we have a different understanding in our house than a lot of other people do. But I think, you know, the point you just made, Chris, like, the fact that community members in your community would learn about the state of the disease in your community from a story in the New York Times, you know, putting aside that, like, for people, full disclosure, Chris doesn't live in New York. So it might be one thing if there was some belief that was their local paper. But I mean, it definitely needs to be conveyed by local leaders, because A, it's important information for people to have, and B, it creates a level of trust that we're not trying to hide anything from you. I think there are some significant holes, Chris, in data, in particular data around students and student learning. I mean, you can go all over the map here, but different schools and different school districts have different amounts of information. I mean, you mentioned in the opening, in some communities, they don't even have a good accounting for a good number of the students, right? And like, so it's hard to measure, you know, student learning or engagement in, you know, online school or if you don't even know where they are. So I think there are some holes in the data, but I do think that we know enough for policymakers, both in their policymaking role, but also in their sort of community leader role, to be aggressively pushing out, like, here's what we know and here's why we're trying to do the things that we need to do. That's really important, that I don't know that's being done really well around the country. I think that there are some bright spots you see in some communities, but given sort of the next cycle of this pandemic that we're into, I think it's going to be important for communication to get ramped up way more than it has been.
There's a key point in there from Sekou. I'd love to kick it to you, Perry, just in that our local data infrastructure, our educational infrastructure isn't 100% modernized. Families like mine right now are looking for additional opportunities to learn. So as our school districts go on and offline, we are scouring, like Google, for instance, and it pops up all the Google results of the local kind of, like, Minnesota Virtual Academy, which is a statewide for-profit, or I believe it may be a nonprofit, but it's definitely not the district school. And we're seeing these other options pop up. Do you think that for families like mine, that there is the opportunity for public-private partnerships to work together during this time? Because the infrastructure on both sides isn't perfect, but, you know, maybe for families like mine, you know, a public-private partnership offers us more opportunities.
I think this is a time where we definitely have to take advantage of all of our resources and try to mend them where necessary. So like you said, if it is a public-private partnership to serve kids during this time, I think that we have to go that route. I also have to keep in mind when we talk about data, even from the standpoint of just notifying the school that you've been exposed. If it's all about self-reporting, there are some people that are not going to report that. So in your case, where you mentioned about getting the information from the New York Times, wonder where they pull their data that is not being reported locally. So those are the things, when you think about data, you have to think of the sources also. But I'm more, like you said, more concerned about, hey, my kids, my personal kids getting, and people that look like me, or people that have the resources or don't have the resources, how are we getting them the information to best support their students? Because we know that students are the ones that are suffering and going to suffer long term if we don't have a secure plan or a plan that can transition in and out of school. And I think that's the challenge. And I think that's where we have to say, hey, how are all of our resources? How can we pool all of our resources? Do the things that haven't been done before. We're experiencing times that we haven't experienced before. So we've got to look at it from a standpoint of saying, we can't say, well, we didn't do it like that last time. And we hadn't experienced this. So there was no last time. We have to look at it and not look at it for just right now. But like you said, hey, we don't know the long-term results or long-term impact of people who've experienced COVID. And we don't know the long-term impact on our students going in and out of school, being serviced by teachers who are reacting, having to react. And this is not a knock at teachers, but having to react. So coming from a place where I've worked in the virtual setting, I work in the virtual setting now as an educator, there are some resources that virtual schools have that are beneficial, but it has to be communicated in the needs and the way that's going to best suit the students that are coming to the virtual setting, who are walking away or running away from something they're not sure about. So if you think about virtual or you think about private-public combination, I think it goes back to what Curtis said, communication, and what Sekou said about trust. How do we communicate so we trust what's being crafted to support our children? And how do we also hold that, whatever it comes together to be, hold it accountable so that we're getting constant feedback and good data to make sure we're making the best decision? And that's what I think a Black leader or any leader should be thinking about at this time.
And I was going to say, Perry, I mean, you took the words right out of my mouth. Trust is sort of the byproduct of all this, but trust is sort of the bridge to the innovation, the change, the things that have to take place in order to get to the next, the next level. I think about, particularly from Sekou's perspective from DC, the tenure of a perception of Michelle Rhee and Kyra Henderson in the city. And I mean, Sekou is much more articulated about this than I am, but the idea that many people say the policies of Kyra Henderson did not change or deviate that much from Michelle Rhee, but there was a level of communication, there was a level of trust that was built in it, and we can get into race or whatever you want to call it, but it was clear that in educational leadership, there's going to be bad news. We're in this space, any public space, there's going to be bad news. But at the same time, you can't presuppose how people are going to receive that bad news, especially if you don't give it to them, to give them a choice to do it in the first place. There's a really good book called Leadership and Self-Deception. It kind of talks about these spirals that people have, that by presupposing what your response is going to be, I sort of couch my communication to you in that way, which pretty much becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I withhold information I think you can't handle it, based on my own preconceived idea, which are probably more personal than anything else. I couldn't handle it, so I assume that you couldn't either. And so then so it spirals. You respond the way I anticipated, and then I say, see, I told you that you couldn't handle this. Versus, no, be very clear. You don't have the data? Tell me why you don't have the data. Tell me what you're going to do to get the data. Tell me why this data is important, and tell me what you're doing in the meantime. Tell me, again, give me, and that's where power is. Now you're giving power back to people who are feeling like they're less empowered. Now you're giving me the option to make a decision about how I should feel versus you presupposing how I should feel. This is the trust that I think we need as a system to move forward as it relates to education, innovation, do the tough things that happen. If you look at trust in members of school boards like myself and superintendents and public officials, even those who are, who are tuning in, there's trust, but it only goes so far. But I think has a direct relationship to how much trust that leader has in his or her people, in a lot of ways, and a lot of that's coming from data, communication, leadership, and then as my colleagues here, my co-panelists are saying, that trust. Because that trust, if you don't have that trust, you're not going to be able to get from here to the next level of progress. And those that do have it, you could see think of every leader we've ever had. They've all been very good communicators. I mean, in some way, shape, or form, but also not afraid to sort of give us bad news, but explain to us how they're going to get past that and to use that as a way to take us to the next level and collectively, while empowering us to feel like I have the power to decide how I'm going to feel about this, and you're not taking that away from me based on your own preconceived ideas.
Our former superintendent in Minneapolis Public Schools, Bernadette Johnson, used to say to the team all the time that one of our key problems was that we were data rich and information poor. And it used to kind of throw me used to throw me for a loop all the time. Actually, as a board member, I used to kind of think those are the same things. And now that I'm older, I'm like thinking, okay, it's one thing to have data, but does it inform me in some way, shape, or form? Do I know what it means? Can I like figure out what that data is telling me? In this time that my kids have been at home, when they go on Khan Academy, one of the things that I have appreciated when they were doing more work on Khan Academy is every week at the end of the week, it would send me an email saying, these are the concepts that your kid was doing really well at. And these are the ones that they were falling behind on. So that was information. That wasn't data. That was like, so the next week, next Monday, I could say to them, okay, like last week, these were the 4 or 5 things that, you know, that you were struggling a little bit on. So let's pay attention to that level of finite informing me as a parent of what to work on week to week or whatnot does not seem to be taking place in some bigger arena, like in our normal public schools. I'd throw the question out to all of you. Schools and states are looking at suspending testing, and testing's a third rail in public education. It's a hot topic. I'm really fearful of the data vacation. I'm really fearful of what happens if this year we just don't have any baseline for how our students are doing and where they are falling behind and where they're, you know, excelling or doing well. How do you all feel about the suspension of testing, specifically because it's a tough time right now?
I think, you know, there's a couple of things tied up in there. I mean, one is there's certainly like a test administration issue at play here, right? Like when somebody gives me the game plan for how you're going to actually administer the various assessments, and you think about the different kind of assessments being used around the country, how on earth are you going to administer these things at scale, given the current restrictions we have around gatherings and inside and numbers? So I think, you know, it would be helpful to know if somebody's got an answer for how you actually would administer these assessments so that we could get the data. And I think that's an important thing to consider. I'm with you though, Chris, that I would worry about any case for why we don't want more data on student learning and performance and achievement, because to be perfectly honest, like it's sort of a little bit like Curtis was saying earlier, like whatever the news is, good, bad, or otherwise, like that data can then inform us. It can help us have a real sense of where we actually are, not where we want to be. And I think we're going to have a time going forward thinking about, you know, people wanting to say, okay, now that the pandemic's behind us, let's look forward, and like want to gloss over like that all that happened. I think we need that data and that information, you know, whether it's through traditional assessments we're used to giving or by some other means, because, you know, not that we want to hold it, you know, use it against students or want to use it against teachers. So I think the use of it is also important, like how we intend to use it. I think there's a lot of bad assessment data usage that sort of fuels these things that we got to get smarter on. But we're going to be better off having a real sense of where students are and what they've learned and what they haven't during this time than we will be if we don't know.
Well, say cool. Let me change the question. Let me answer. Let me push on the question just a little bit too, though, because you know my grandmother used to say all the time, kind of, you know, we could put a man on the moon, but we can't, and she would fill in the blank with anything we couldn't do that she thought we should be able to do. Right? I heard that my entire childhood. We could put a man on the moon, but we can't, you know. And I never knew what the put the man on the moon thing had to do with anything. But if I was a leader right now, I would be saying we could put a man on the moon, but you can't tell me how our kids are faring. Khan Academy can tell me week to week with their embedded assessment system. But our school systems can't. So as a kind of a militant leader, if I was elected somewhere and I said to my governor and to everybody else, man, I expect you to be informing parents week to week on what concepts at least their kids are falling behind on or whatever. Is that a fair kind of push?
I think so, Chris, because I think, you know, one of the things about this moment is, and this is where, you know, legislators and policymakers can be hugely helpful, right, is, I mean, we're seeing right now in all sectors of society, like there's a need to be creative, right? To be innovative, to solve for problems we had not solved for before. So, you know, like I said earlier, like putting to the side for the moment, the traditional sets of assessments we've used, like, because maybe nobody can solve for how we do that. But I'm with you 100%. Like there has to be a way to gather information on what students are learning, not learning, how well they're doing, what their level of engagement is. I mean, you know, I go back to like both the old teacher in me, but also when I did teacher professional development, like if we cannot actually accumulate like evidence that tells us what students did and learned, then we weren't teaching, right? So I think we have to have a way to have something, and we can, you know, put some context around what the data, you know, what the sources are, where it comes from, how it's different and other things. We're not necessarily comparing our old data and assessments to this one, but in terms of having data about, to your point, like what students learned this year.
We can measure something. Yeah, we can measure something.
Right. That gets to your critical point, which is we're using some data to inform some set of decisions, because it's both what do we do in this moment right now to help maximize learning opportunities for students for however long we're dealing with virtual or hybrid or some amount of in-person. But then also, like, the real challenge for us is going to be, what are we going to prepare ourselves to do for the go forward when this is behind us? Because the recovery, like, I think we're obviously focused on this moment because it's important and urgent on top of us right now. I think the real like path to solution is going to be our level of commitment to the recovery needed for all kinds of students to make up for what's gone on for however long this goes on. That's going to be, and that's going to require, to your point, like real data and information to inform a go forward strategy.
I hope that we are taking it seriously, and I hope our leaders are taking it seriously. I actually have a sense, a sinking sense in my stomach that we're not as serious about this as we would be about other issues. When I say to you, if I was a Black leader in a legislature somewhere and I heard that at the moment right now, no one is tracking the fact that we are losing Black wealth and that it will be half of what it is next year, you know, based upon data A and data B of whatnot, I would get so animated so fast and so quick. So when I tell you that 8 million Black children, it's possible that they might be losing half of the gains that they made and that they were already behind before COVID, I would expect a similar set of kind of urgent statements, urgent kind of actions. And I don't know I can't prescribe what those would be. Perry or Curtis, I mean, jump in there and help me out here. Like how would my public know that I was being urgent about the challenge before me with learning?
I think it has to look at how we have to look at how we're going to use the data. First of all, any teacher during these times where everybody's focused on data, that's how you guide what your next move is. You're looking at, were students successful? Did they master this particular skill in order for us to move forward? So there should be some form of data that's being, you know, pulled from somewhere to guide instruction. Okay, on a bigger scale, I also question, if we're thinking about state assessments and things of that nature. Yes, how are we going to do it? That is a question. The other thing that always it's coming into play also is the digital divide. Are all of our students playing on the same playing field, or is the playing field level? And we know that it's not. So even from that standpoint, how do we gauge what students need? How do we get them what they need so that we can truly find out what they know or don't know? So I think those are things that have to be considered. So if from a policymaker standpoint, I'm trying to make sure my constituents have what they need so that we can at least get them to a point where I can assess what you should be receiving on an educational standpoint. So if that means that we've got to come up with some policies to make sure you have access to the internet because you can't go to school every day, that's the first step. Now I got to get to the point, okay, now we have access. How do I make sure that we can communicate with you in a way you have the knowledge to use these tools so that I can instruct and extract data from you so that I can continue to provide the best plan for you academically. So this is a big picture. There are a lot of factors that have to be considered, but we've got to get to a point to level the playing field. I agree. I think there has to be some form of assessment, even if it may not be the traditional way, but even if I believe in growth. Can we assess if students are making growth? Because that, if you're with me for a day, or if you're with me for 6 months, you should be better than you were when you came to me. You know,
I mean, on that point, Curtis, I mean, help me out, man, because the man on the moon problem. Help me out again. So
I mean,
big data and our social media companies know when you lose 15 pounds. They know why you got your hair cut. They could predict when you're going to shave your beard off or put it back on. They could have even predicted that Perry wasn't going to shave his head to be part of our club today so that we would all be bald together, right? Big data could do big things. But then when we get to schools, it feels like there's just so much we can't do. I don't get it. Help me out, Curtis.
I mean, so let's stick with this man on the moon analogy, right? So the idea that we went to the moon, was it because we were fearful that someone else would get there first? Or did we do it because we thought that by doing it, we could take our country and our mindset to a level of anything is possible, which gets to your mother's point. I would hope that those who are watching here resist the temptation that I think is going to happen as legislatures open back up, which is try to create this level of fear around everything and legislate out of fear of, we must do this or else. I think you miss a tremendous opportunity if everything is out of fear versus you look at it as an opportunity. I think you need to be very careful about this. People are going to say, are you trying to take advantage of people's misfortunes? No, we are in a space right now that innovation flourishes in. So you talk about standardized testing. My children all this week were taking tests. At the same time, my wife and I were sort of racking our brains on how to get on. We couldn't get on the platform, kept getting kicked off, timing, the teachers trying to help other students. And I said, well, what if teachers said, you know what, we're gonna look at this assessment in a different way. We're gonna give students the understanding what Perry says, that the playing field is not level. And while all of us are sort of in this pandemic, it's touching us all. It's all touching us all differently. So while we're all in the same boat, some of us are in different cabins. Some of us are in first class, and some of us are, in steerage. But we're all in the same boat. But understanding that, can we give flexibility in how we assess? So maybe say Ku's son will do a written exam because that's best suited for him. Maybe Perry's son will do something more of a video or a way to just affirm what I've learned and what I'm missing. I think this idea of sort of bringing in all these strict sort of past ways into a new space, just to me is a missed opportunity. That you're going to walk into a new space, you're going to go into a new world with your old clothes on, and expect to sort of walk in there and fully embrace a lot of the opportunities you have. You have to resist that, because I think there are tremendous opportunities for us to benefit from this space of, there are things that we would not have nearly had much freedom to do if we had not had that opportunity. But it gets back to our previous piece. If people don't trust you, it's not going to matter. Assessments, at least, a lot of folks will say assessments are used to penalize. And that rhetoric has sort of seeped through. Teachers feel that way, students feel that way in a lot of ways. And so you walk into a test anxious, the teachers are anxious, everyone's anxious. You're doing this just to find ways to penalize me versus no. This is a checkup. I'm a trainer trying to get you ready for the NFL, for the combine, to make you some money one day. Let's just reframe the conversation to the point where you want it. Hey, please, can you help me out? I need to learn more how I can get better in order to get to this point. But if they don't believe you're invested in getting them to that point, everything that precedes that is going to seem like a penalty. And if it's a penalty, you operate in fear. Come into this session and because all your colleagues are going to be, I think that the majority of us are going to operate out of a fear. If we don't do this right now, people will, and all that stuff just pushes everybody to operate in fear versus no, come to the table with some innovation, some opportunities, and some exploration that I think would be quite different than a lot of your colleagues who are going to operate in fear. And then the people who are responding on it, and then the average resident, the average constituent is going to do things out of fear, and everything from that becomes more constrictive rather than more open-minded.
as a parent and as a constituent, I think about something like a blood pressure test, which I consider to be high stakes for Black people, especially for Black men, especially Black men my age. There'd be a lot of reasons I wouldn't want to go to the doctor. There's many of us that don't go when we're supposed to at age 45 and age 50 and do all the stuff we're supposed to do. There is, I think, a fear of what you're going to be told and the outcome. But as a parent, I have the opposite fear. I have the fear of not knowing whether or not my blood pressure is, high or low or whatever. So all the politics that go into the system fighting itself about whether or not we should have these blood pressure tests for our kids, basically is the way that I see them, don't make as much sense to me as a parent, because all I want is the data. I just want the information. Tell me, are we behind? Are we up? Are we down? Where are we? Should I be doing more? Should I and we're all asking questions as parents right now that revolve around that. Should I be doing more? Or am I doing the right thing? Or is this product that I'm purchasing good? I do want to shift it a little bit to something that gets even a little bit more spicy in some ways, which is just this idea that as a parent right now, there's a lot that the system can't do for me and that the local schools aren't doing for me, and yo-yoing in and out of existence, putting my kids back at home and, back there again. One thing I notice is that resources matter for families right now. So families that don't have resources, and resources come in many forms. I only mentioned one today, which is broadband, but that is like one of the basic utilities of all the resources I'm talking about. And I do know that there are certain family groups right now that are using their resources to make sure that their kids stay on track and move forward. But the things that they are accessing require money. They require resources. Is it out of line for me to say to my state and like right now in Minnesota, we have a tax credit that allows us to deduct things that we do that are supplemental to our kids' education, like tutoring and books and stuff like that? Is it out of line for me right now to go to my leaders and say, since you're not running schools anyways, and you've sent my kids home and told me to educate them, we're going to need you to up the ante on what we can spend. First of all, we're going to need some money, and we're going to need you to up the ante on what we can use it for, because we're watching families with advanced resources do things for their kids that we don't have access to right now. Is it out of hand to start getting some of our per pupil money into the hands of families?
Well, Chris, I'll take your question and raise you a couple items, because I think,
woo, I like that. Let's do it.
It's not out of hand. Let's be real here. You've talked about some things that you're able to do to help support your children that have, and Perry mentioned this earlier, that there's some of the things that we're doing as parents because we've either got resources, including knowledge, skill, flexibility, some of us are we're solving IT problems at our house, which keep our kids engaged, on an ongoing basis. But we also benefit from, in a significant way, the lives we've built for our children to support their success, that inject other resources in. And so I would say this, because what instruction looks like is all over the map. There are kids who, at least right now, are still walking into school buildings on some regular basis, and there are kids who've been getting some form of online instruction. And so I think the only thing I would change about your question is the framing, because I don't know that it's fair to say, because this isn't true everywhere, that because you've sent the kids home and I'm teaching them, in a lot of cases, my son's upstairs right now, in class, and somebody's actually teaching class. But that doesn't change the fact that there's still a lot about school that a lot of kids, even those who are getting the best and this is once again, at the top, even those that are getting the best online virtual instruction are still missing out on some things. And we got to solve for some of those now. And you talk about resources. Not that I go out very much, but I have now been in the habit of taking my son out a couple days a week. And in the mornings, I drive by the same school that has dozens, if not hundreds, of people lined up around the block there to pick up meals for their household, every single day, right? That's that's a really baseline level thing, but we got to be real about, households where kids qualify for free reduced lunch, that need has not gone away. In fact, for many of them, you talked about lack of wealth and people losing. For many of our children, those issues have gotten more profound. So I think we've got to be honest about the need to push resources in and out to families. So you mentioned, tax credits. In some cases, we've got households who a tax credit's not going to solve their problem. They need, the actual cash or some other way to get access to the resources, whether it's free internet or it's devices, or in other cases, it's like, what's the thing that's going to work for them? And we had kids who needed to come to school and pick up, work packets so they could do work. They needed like we've got to figure out that. So I think it's not out of line. And I would actually say that probably what we need is for families and community members to be asking, their elected representatives, like, what are the things you all can do to sort of fill in the gaps around the school experience? Because the school experience, let's be honest, is more than just you sitting in class engaging with the teacher, right? There's all the other informal, there's the kids at recess, there's the conversations they have with their friends before and after school, and a good amount of that stuff has just evaporated, but all of that contributed to children learning. So I think,
Well, I want to push on that too, just a little bit. And Curtis, you can help me out here too. From, as an elected official, you're going to have to answer to middle-class families and families that are working class and families that are lower working class and underclass families. This is not just one group. Everybody's had their life kind of turned upside down here. And I will say this much, like, school boards are going to be very nervous about anything that puts more resources into the hands of actual parents, because they're school boards and they have to worry about their budgets. But we're not talking about school anymore. We're talking about learning, because in many ways, school's not happening in many places. And even a family like mine that is middle class, we have 3 kids in the system. We could be paying a tutor $20 to $30 an hour for the math part that our kids aren't getting or not understanding. And that starts adding up quickly. Now multiply that through multiple of the classes that they're taking, that they're not getting real teaching. They're still in school right now. They're still doing distance learning. But if I'm being real with you, families like mine are starting to have to supplement in ways that adds up real quick.
Chris, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I mentioned earlier this idea of resisting the temptation to lead with fear. I think we also have to resist the temptation to look at things as a zero-sum game, and it's either or. I think what Sekou mentioned around sort of the basics, right? So getting many places, the majority of the district, at least in my district, to level, which is food, resources, access, material, all those things are important. At the same time, there are other families similar to yours, Chris, or even mine, that have been putting in the resources to the point where those resources benefit the child, the parent, obviously, but they also benefit the system overall. In the end, my child joining an online book club, joining this group is going to, if we want to get down to the data, and for those of you who are like kind of really married to these standardized test scores, that's going to benefit you at an expense that my wife and I have said we're willing to do, and we say just can't wait for my child. So let me give another example. So as legislator on this panel, people listening and saying, all right, how do you even frame this conversation? If I'm an employee of UNCF and I come to Sekou and say, hey man, I want to go out and do this professional development. I'm going to pay for it myself. I just want, some level of reimbursement, something like that. But in the end, UNCF as an organization is going to benefit. As I benefit, so does UNCF. Would Sekou say, yeah, that's on you to do that. If you don't do it, you don't have to do it. If you don't do it, but I'm saying, well, I'm going to come back a better employee, and I'm still UNCF. I'm still going to benefit the organization. I'm still going to benefit all the students who attend UNCF schools. How does a system that's going to benefit in the long run, I'm following Prince George's County Public Schools and all the systems in your community, saying that, no, we're not going to incentivize our parents to do something that's going to benefit the child first, family second, but the district overall, because what's the alternative, Chris? The alternative is to say, no, we're not going to do the understanding, the difficulties, particularly in Black families there. You're middle class, I imagine many of us are, but Black middle class versus white middle class are two different sort of measures of income. And yes. So this idea of the cold flu, walking pneumonia, a lot of us have sort of a semblance of security, but are 1, 2, 3 paychecks away from standing in that same line that Sekou sees every morning. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's important that, again, it's not either or. unfortunately, policy legislation, you know, I do policies. I know Sekou does, I'm sure Perry, and you do, Chris. It is so easy to pit one group over the other. Not understanding that there are people outside of the space who have already decided to cap us out and let us all fight for it. Not knowing that there's more money outside of this conversation that needs to come into the conversation. And we can't be just sort of bickering over the same pot of money, saying that, you know, this is all we got and we had to choose this over that. No. To me, I think that's a false choice. I think there's a way to come together. It's not either or, and it's not fear. It is both and it is this conversation of who benefits. That's always at the end of the conversation. Who benefits? The child first and foremost, the family by the investment, but the school. I would hope more parents in Prince George's County were doing what my wife and I are doing. I imagine some are, but I would never do anything to disincentivize them from doing that, because again, my system and me, the school board member, I benefit.
Well, and, you know, I know we're coming to time, so we need to wrap. And I would hope, you know, to wrap in some of your final comments from each of you, to get some final comments around you, that we would, first of all, with Black leaders right now, I love what you just said, Curtis, about not pitting groups against each other. As Black people with Black leaders, I would hope that our Black leaders don't get all lives mattered out of any solutions that really help specifically Black families. Right. I would hope that, like, our Black leaders would be recognizing to take stock of what we need and what's going on. More than anything right now, my final thought on all of this, and I'll let each of you kind of wrap some final thoughts for us, is that families need resources right now. Learning is being interrupted in ways in which we are going to fall behind. Curtis, when you talk about trust, Black people have to be cautious about trust with their government. They have to be cautious about their trust with systems and systems leaders, because if anybody's ever going to get left behind, I think we have enough data and research over years and years and years and years to say that's going to be us. So right now we are watching white families and more resourced families and others try to do all that they can to maintain their wealth, maintain their kids' academic health, and keep their standing. And I think we need to be in a similar position with our leaders to say, you know, the Janet Jackson principle, what have you done for me lately? We're going to need you to actually, like, put something on the table right now that resources families to do the best they can to be good guardians for their kids. So fellas, let's do a lightning round of final thoughts. Let's wrap this all up into a neat little bow for Black leadership and Black leaders who are watching. What are you going to give them, you know, as your exit poll of what they could be doing for us?
I'll take it first. I think that for Black leaders, it's important that we look at the end game. And when we think about education, we're not thinking about the right now. We're thinking long term, but the actions have to happen right now. So in that thought, I'm gonna give some grace. I'm gonna give some grace because this is a little different, but continue with accountability. Continue with accountability to say, hey, we still have a job to do. And it's not only on the legislators or Black leaders, it's about building the team. So if they're in a position to lead, they have to Jordan had his Pippen, you've got to build the team. You've got to build the team, and the best, I think when you look at it and we think about it thoroughly, great teams were honest with each other. They trusted one another. They held each other accountable, and everybody did what they were supposed to do to win. And I think that's what we have to expect, not only from our Black leaders, but also from those that call themselves allies as well. That everybody has to do what they're supposed to do to have the larger impact, and specifically support the children that are being impacted by this. So.
Great. Curtis?
If I can put in a bumper sticker, I would say trust first as a leader. Trust the parents first, and the decisions that they're making for their children and what they say to you. You want to be trusted by your parents, by your constituents. Trust them first. I would say trust your school leaders. In my organization, we produced a recent document called the Innovation Schools Guide. Schools that sort of give more autonomy to school leaders to make decisions in the building that are going to be most appropriate for the students, for the parents in that building. And so in many ways, ceding control to schools to make decisions on behalf of the parents who are most closely aligned with the school is incredibly important. Trust that, trust those around you who are hearing from parents and in many ways may not fit the narrative that you think should be based on your own prior experience, and then trust the future. There are things that are going to be coming out of this that I think will be historic in a positive way if you trust where these things take you and sort of leave a lot of your misconceptions and your preconceived ideas about these things in the past. We are at an opportunity point. And if you walk into this space with the same thoughts and the same garments, I think you'll miss out on this. It's not about fear. It's not about pitting one group against another. It's not about it's either or conversations. It's looking at the opportunity, trusting those around you, and ceding control back to those who I think historically have been disempowered and whose trust you need in order to lead, to lead you into the future. So in the end, trust first, and trust will come back to you. Thank you.
Perfect. Sekou.
Sure thing. I think, well, first of all, thanks. I mean, I think that, we're here talking to Black legislators, and having been an elected official, I just appreciate what folks are doing. And frankly, look, I point out to my staff all the time, I haven't gotten a memo yet that it's gotten easy to be Black in America, because it hasn't. And like, it's not easy to be a Black legislator. So I just want to put that out there. I mean, Black elected officials get held to a higher bar and a different bar than everybody else. And a lot of the challenges they're up against are that many of their colleagues, especially the not Black ones, are complicit in cutting us off from the resources that would make things easier and open up the path to success for Black communities. I think that's hugely important. I mean, I think Curtis is on to a lot. Like, you got to listen to folks. I mean, I think COVID's made this harder, but I think legislators, and I remember as a city council and a school board member, like, how much I just learned about the nature of the problem in other people's lives when I just went and listened to them. So I think finding ways to hear directly from community members and a diverse group of them to understand, like, what's it really look like from where they sit, to help you sort of construct the solutions. And then I think, this notion of false choices is absolutely right. Chris, you talked a lot about, school budgets and resources for families. I think I've been pushing people recently to think about, school as part of the overall youth development that we invest in children to make them the most successful, productive adults they can be. And I think we're missing a lot when we try to put it all on schools and school districts to like solve for that. And this moment is a good example of, there are other assets in government and in our communities that are supposed to support the development of young people. Let's think creatively in, state, county, local budgets about how we unleash many more of those and push them in the direction of the families that are the most needy. Because to go back to your, man on the moon, point, I mean, I think people sometimes overlook the simplicity of like why that was even possible, right? Like, you time limit it. Like, people have to take a stand and say, by a date certain, we're going to need to have some things happen for children. And, so give a time limit on what we need to have happen. And then be clear about like the degree to which we're going to hold people accountable for the outcome. I mean, one of the reasons we were successful in that pursuit was, I imagine there were a lot of people when they pushed back on colleagues and said, oh, I don't think we can do that. One of their colleagues said to them, well, since the president said we're going to by the end of the decade, you can go tell them that, but I'm gonna keep working here until we figure out a way to make it happen, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that, the accountability is important, but it's something that doesn't happen much in elected life, where you have to be willing to commit to an outcome and a time limit on that will force some action and activity. But, we've got to have also, to Curtis' point, we got to have some trust in our elected officials that, they will do right by us, but they also need to know that I think they need to tap into many more of the assets. And I'm sure for Perry and Curtis, I'll speak for them, like any one of us and all our organizations would love to help them in any way we can. but we've got to extend some trust to our elected officials and believe that they're acting in our behalf, and then support them. And support, sometimes looks like a pat on the back, and sometimes support looks like a kick in the behind. So you got to be there to do that for folks as well. But I think, some of our elected officials are going to have to work really, really hard to sort of push their constituents into the game and be more active. If the last election showed us anything, like, you got to mobilize people to get out and be in the game.
That's right.
Like, help them understand that their voices really do matter here.
Yeah, I'm always full listening to you, brothers. There's a lot of wisdom in this panel. Thank you for this hour and for your time for adding to the conversation. I want to thank EdChoice for always being willing to bring us together and give us the opportunity to kind of share and cut it up for Black men to be able to have a say in this world. Also, want to thank the National Black Caucus of State Legislators for offering us a stage, a time, to actually be heard. And also, as a former elected official myself, I'll echo what some of my brothers on the panel are saying. Is I believe that the work that we do is not always valued the way that it should be valued. So the work that you all are doing, we don't want you to consider this a thankless job. Thank you for representing us. And I want to just put it on the table for anybody watching, anybody in America, Black, white, brown, green, or otherwise, if you are benefiting from a program of any sort that helps you at any point in your life through the government, I can almost guarantee you that it has its roots and its genesis in a Black elected official somewhere. And if there's anybody who is fighting for you to continue to have that benefit anywhere in the United States at any point in your life when you need help, I can almost guarantee you that it has its genesis and its origin in the hands of a Black elected official. So we thank you all for the work that you do, and please continue to do it with our support. Thank you.